Well, welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening, and on this cold winter's night, which reminds me of England and why I left England. But I left Tel Aviv was 20 degrees, so that's just an advertisement for Israeli tourism. We'll come to that later. I guess I wanted to come this evening and talk about how one can deal with tragedy and the events that took place in my life 7.5 months ago, exactly 6 months before October the 7th. So it's actually April 7th. I guess my family and I feel that what happened to us happened to the whole of Israel 6 months later. And therefore, perhaps some of the things that we went through are relevant to maybe everybody else now. And maybe not, but you can judge for yourself. So the question is really how one can respond to tragedy. And as I say, I'm a novice. I'm still only 7.5 months into it, so I'm not an expert. But I can tell you what I've learned. I think that there are two options in Chazal, right, in the Jewish sources of how to react to tragedy. But I'm sure there are many more. Two contrasting options which I'm aware of. One of which is to basically to be scared, to be shocked, to be saddened, to cry, to be fearful, and many other words which I don't know in English, I don't probably know in Russian or German. So, many feelings that come together. There's a natural response to tragedy is just to feel, this combination of feelings. To ask why. And I think the role model for this in the Torah is Eov, right? Eov, who is struck by every tragedy under the sun, sits in his house, in his lounge, is surrounded by his friends who question, whether it should have happened, whether it shouldn't have happened, whether God cares, whether God doesn't care, whether Job was guilty, whether he was not guilty, and they come to no conclusion. There seems to be no purpose for this discussion whatsoever. And after 42 chapters, God gives Job some smachot, some reason to celebrate, and the book comes to an abrupt end, and we can all be very happy not to have to study anything more about Job. That's my assessment of Job. The rabbis argue whether the story actually happened, and most of them say it didn't ever happen. And they say if it did happen, Job was not Jewish. And I think it's very important that they say Job is not Jewish, because this is not a Jewish response to tragedy. It's a very natural response to tragedy. Often the natural way that the natural response is not the correct response. I'll give you another example just because it's fun. Natural response of man and wife arguing, right? If you look in popular books and magazines and films, is you split up, right? If you argue too much, that must be a bad sign. You have to split up, right? The Torah says that the wife is Ezer Kenegdo. Okay, and Rabbi Leo Dee in the Gemara says, in one of his two Perushim, he says, how can she be a helper against him? Right? She's either a helper or she's against him. So he says, if he merits her, then they fight. And if he doesn't merit her, she hits him. That's the conclusion that Rabbi Leo Dee comes to in the Gemara, meaning that a healthy relationship is having someone who actually can be your equal and can actually argue with you. And contrary to, the natural response, which is we don't like conflict, actually having a certain amount of healthy conflict with the spouse turns out to be the Jewish response to relationships. Anyway, so I'm not sure if that just is an example of how Jewish culture is not necessarily going with the normal, natural sort of, intuitive, but actually sometimes is going over and above. So that's one option, is job. But there's a second option, I think, which the Torah gives us, and that is of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students in 24 years. Okay, in 7 weeks. Okay, he trained his students over 24 years, 24,000, and he lost them in 7 weeks, probably to the Bar Kokhba rebellion against the Romans. They're probably massacred by Roman soldiers, and amongst those were probably most of his friends, most of his family, all his life's work, and at the end of that, he could have just quit, right? That would have been the natural sort of job response. He could have sat in his lounge, had probably not many friends coming to visit him because they'd all been massacred, but perhaps a few friends coming and discussing what had happened to him and what had happened this time in Jewish history, and does God care, and did God want him to train them, and did God want him not to train them, why did he do it to him? But instead, what does he do? We see he picks himself up, and after a short period of time, he finds 5 students, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. He trains them to be the top rabbis in the generation. They write the Mishnah, and they become the main rabbis of the Mishnah. And because of them, we have the Talmud that we have today, and we have all of Jewish learning. So Rabbi Akiva didn't fall into despair, and he didn't question too much about why things happened. He just got on and he did stuff. Another story, he's walking across the Temple Mount with his friends. He sees the Temple Mount in destruction, and he laughs. And his friends say to him, why are you laughing? He says, because there were 2 prophecies. One of Micha, who said that... Micha? Uriah. It was Micha, okay. Uriah. Who says that the Temple Mount would be destroyed. And one of Zechariah, who said that the 3rd temple would be rebuilt. So he said, until I saw the temple destroyed, I didn't believe it would be rebuilt. Now I've seen it destroyed, I believe that there'll be a 3rd temple, and therefore I'm laughing about that. So we see that here's a man who can laugh when everything he's done in his life has been destroyed. We see a man who can laugh when, laugh, but he can build himself up when his life's work has been destroyed. We see he can laugh when the dream of the Jewish people for 500 years has been destroyed. And then another story of Rabbi Akiva. He is being torn apart in his last few moments by a Roman soldier who's basically the Hamas terrorist of the day. They're scraping his skin and his flesh from his bones. And apparently his students are standing around him. And he shouts out those words, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad. And his students shout back. I'm going to ask, anyone remember what his students shout back? Do you remember what his students shout back? He shouts out Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad. His students shout back Ad Kan, meaning to that extent. Now, let me ask you a question. Shema Yisrael, what does it mean? We said every day, twice a day at least, right? It's the first thing we teach our kids. What does it mean? I mean, if you had to sum it up in one word, it's an expression of what? Love of God, faith, emunah, whatever, right? That's what most people would say, right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Echad, God's one, I love God, whatever it is. Okay, fine. That's how we think, what we think it means, okay? Well, if that's what it means, why would his students shout out Ad Kan, meaning to this extent, meaning that you're being killed, you still believe it now? Like, what would be the hover meaning? What would be what thought process would go through their head? That Rabbi Akiva, who's the greatest rabbi of his generation, maybe of most generations, right, would not believe in God just because he's being killed, right? Because we know that in English we say there's no atheist in a foxhole, meaning that any atheist who's about to die believes in God, right? So therefore, Rabbi Akiva, who believed in God so much his whole life, why would there be even a suspicion that he wouldn't believe in God just because he's being killed, right? So, in order to understand this question, which interestingly I haven't seen many people bring up, you have to understand a very important Rashi. Like it's the most important Rashi, in my opinion, in the Torah, and it's the least well known. Okay, so figure that one out. It's the Rashi on Shema Yisrael. Okay, so if you look up the Rashi on Shema Yisrael, for some reason rabbis don't like teaching it, but the Rashi reads, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, God who is our God now, Hashem Echad will be the one God of all the nations in the future. Meaning that Shema Yisrael is not according to that Rashi, it's not a statement of belief, it's a statement of purpose, it's a statement of mission. The Jewish people's mission is to spread the idea of Hashem across the world, right? And maybe we could say in modern terms, spread the idea of Western civilization, of Judeo-Christian values. We like to call it that because it makes our neighbors very happy to hear that. So whatever, but that's what we're talking about. Our duty, and so then it also would explain why we would want to teach our kids that as the first thing that we teach them, because it tells them why be Jewish, why do all these other things, because that's what we're trying to achieve. And number two, it also is why we say it twice a day, because actually that's our purpose, right? So, okay, now when he says Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Echad, they say Ad Kan, meaning to that extent, okay, meaning that who is he saying it to when he says our God is going to be your God? He's saying it to the executioner. He's saying it to the Hamas terrorist who's pulling him apart. He's saying, whatever you're doing to me now, he said, your God will be, you will believe in my God in the future. Your people will follow my God in the future. And his students reply to him after that. They say, Ad Kan, do you really care? Like, let them go to hell. Who cares? Who cares about these people? Who cares what God they have? Just let them go to hell. And Rabbi Akiva says, because it says, B'chol nafshecha, it says you have to do it with your whole soul. In other words, even when Hashem takes your soul, even when they kill you, even when Hashem causes you to die, you still have to believe this, right? So that was Rabbi Akiva's response to his students. In other words, this is what's going on in this dialogue. So we see that Rabbi Akiva is optimistic, even when he's been killed, even when his students have been killed, and even when the whole dream of the Jewish people, he's optimistic. Now, he's not optimistic, having said that, because Rabbi Sachs, Zatzal, explains there's a difference between optimism and hope. I don't know if you saw this, but his daughter Gila talked about it recently, a couple of weeks ago on a video. He used to say this quite a lot. He said there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is believing that things will get better. Hope is doing something to make them better, right? So the Jewish approach is not optimism. It's not about sitting there thinking, oh, it might get better, right? It's about hope, which is doing something to make it better. That was Rabbi Akiva. He did something in order to make things better. So how did Rabbi Akiva know that hope was the right way to respond to tragedy? And I think the answer is he looked into Jewish history and he saw in Jewish history, Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? We came out of Egypt. We were the lowest of the low. We were at the 49th level of degradation, right? We were almost idol worshippers, right? After 80 years of slavery in Egypt. And then Hashem took us out, and within 7 weeks we're taking the Torah from Hashem on Har Sinai. Okay, so we went from the lowest point to a level of geula, of redemption, in 7 weeks. And if Rabbi Akiva had Ruach HaKodesh, he had the prophecy, right? He would have seen that the Jewish people would spend 6 years in Nazi death camps, and then after 3 years would be going and establishing the state of Israel, right? And if he had further Ruach HaKodesh, he might have seen that Jews would be digging graves all over the land of Israel because they were under attack by Arabs, and 6 days later would be capturing the Kotel, Jerusalem, and Judah and Shomron, right? So this is the history of the Jewish people. This is the reality of the Jewish people. When the Jewish people are struck by tragedy, it always leads to a step towards geula, towards redemption. And so therefore we've just been struck by the largest tragedy in our lifetimes, right? Greater than 67, greater than 48. And maybe in terms of violence and in terms of in terms of the evil, perhaps even greater in some respects to the Holocaust. So that means that the step forward has to be a big step forward. Now, if you look in the Shemini Esrei, which lists out our stages towards redemption, the next stage for us as a people is building the third temple. So, not that I'm suggesting it's going to happen tomorrow, but that seems to be, this could be a step towards that particular process. And if you wanted to believe that actually something different to normal is going on in what we saw on October the 7th, I think you could see a number of hints, okay, and probably you're aware of many of them. First of all, it was Shabbat Simchat Torah. There are two commandments that are forbidden to non-Jew, which are keeping Shabbat and studying Torah, right? And this happened on Shabbat Simchat Torah. And I think that the message here is that this is a day this was a message specifically for the Jewish people. The Jewish people might be able to pick up on, okay, uniquely. Shemini Atzeret, because of course Simchat Torah and Shemini Atzeret are the same in Israel. Shemini Atzeret, the famous midrash that during Sukkot we sacrifice 70 bulls to represent the 70 nations. But on Shemini Atzeret we only sacrifice one bull, and the midrash says because the king has a party for all his friends, but on the last day he just wants like a private party just for his best friend. So this Shemini Atzeret is the specific holiday specifically for Jews. So that was the day that it took place on. Number one. Number two, Simchat Torah, we open the Sefer Torah Mechadash, right? And we read Briat Olam, right? The creation of the world. So we read about Tohu Bohu, right? Chaos, which I think describes exactly what took place over 12 or 13 hours in Kibbutz Be'eri and 30 hours in some other places, which is just incredible. Unbelievable that the chaos could have led to the opening of the border, but even more unbelievable that it could take 12 to 30 hours to actually get Tzahal to come and to rescue some of the people. And then we see the first thing that Hashem does by Hior, right? First thing Hashem says by Hior, there should be light, and the light cannot be the light of the sun because. As the sun's not created. So what is the light of the first day? It says the light of truth. Okay, Chazal thinks it's the light of truth. And the light of truth was shining on the Sunday morning, right? Because we woke up on Sunday morning and there were people already marching down the streets of Berlin, London, Paris, New York, supporting the terrorists, right? So we could see the light shining on evil. There was a light distinguishing between good and evil, which is basically the light of truth, right? And that light has continued to shine as people continue to march and stick their hand up and say, I'm evil. So we're in a new world, right? Effectively, Briat Olam, opening the Sefer Torah from Mechadash, we are in a new world. October the 8th is a different world to October the 6th, right? And we see this in many ways. We see this in Israel. They call it the reservists for the Chel Avir, for the Air Force. Right? They expected to get a 60% turn-up rate because 40% had been refusing to turn up. They got 120% because 20% said, why didn't you call us as well? So we went from 60% unity to 120% instantaneously. Right? President Biden stood up. This is President Biden who had refused to meet with Bibi for 3 years. Right? Stood up and made the most majestic speech of any leader that I've ever seen in history, including Churchill, in my opinion. Right? His speech that he made that day was full of passion and with emotion and with meaning. And this was from somebody who I hadn't seen stand up to podium without tripping over it or forgetting what he was saying halfway through a speech. But he managed to get it out. And this is incredible. It felt to me that Hashem was speaking through his mouth. And there's a pasuk in Kohelet that says that Lev HaMelech B'yad Hashem, right? That the heart of the king is in the hands of Hashem. And the Rambam explains that everybody has free will except for kings. Why should kings not have free will? Because if a king has the ability to make a decision over millions of people, then he would be taking away the free will of those people. So in order to stop that conflict, Hashem controls the king so that what he does is it actually somehow gives the other millions of people the greatest opportunity to have their free will. So what I saw was Hashem speaking through President Biden on that occasion. And there are many other examples of what happened. We saw, in Germany and London, as you said, we saw people suddenly starting to stand up for anti-Semitism. As anti-Semites, basically, to start marching against Jews in a very public way, which they hadn't done before. Not that they changed into anti-Semites, because I think they were anti-Semites before, but they were prepared to sort of put a flag up and march down the street and express it. So the world has changed. We're in a new world, and that is a good thing. I'll tell you why it's a good thing. When our tragedy happened, I turned to my kids on at the end of the Shloshim, and I said to them, we're in a new world. I said, world number one was until April the 7th. We were 2 parents and 5 kids. I said, we've had 30 days of trauma and sadness and crying and whatever. I said, now we're going to start a new world. It's 1 parent, it's 3 kids. It will be a happy world, and it will be a good world. We'll have all the memories of world number one, but it's a different world completely. And actually somehow reframing it in that way was very helpful, I think, and was very therapeutic. And I think that actually Hashem has given us the ability now to reframe our lives in the context of a new world by putting this on Simchat Torah. So we have a new experience, right? And the question is, how do we respond to it? Okay, so as Jews, we have 3 different ways that we can respond to anything. Right? Number one, the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us Torah, Avodah, Gemilut Chasidim. In other words, Torah, prayer, and action. Okay, those are the 3 options we have available to us. So how can these 3 things help us or guide us in this particular crisis or any crisis? Firstly, Torah. So Rabbi Sachs, Zatzal, was my teacher for a number of years. He said on Parshat Chai Sarah, which was also his Yahrzeit Shabbat, he said, talks about Avraham Avinu. Avraham arrives at Parshat Chai Sarah, it's the last parsha of his life, at the age of 137. At this point, God has made him 3 promises, right? Number 1, that he'll inherit the whole land of Israel. Number 2, that his offspring will be like the stars in the sky. And number 3, that he will be the father of many nations. Okay? Says Rabbi Sachs, he's in crisis because not one of these 3 has actually come about. He said, number 1, he doesn't have a square millimeter in the whole land of Israel. Number 2, his son isn't married, he's got no grandchildren. And number 3, he's got no connection whatsoever with any of the other people in the world. So what does Avraham Avinu do? Number 1, he goes off and he buys the first piece of land in Israel from Ephron. He buys Marat Machpelah to bury Sarah. Number 2, he sends Eliezer, his slave, off to go and marry off Yitzchak and finds Rivka. Now he's guaranteed grandchildren. And number 3, he marries Keturah. They have 6 kids and a number of grandchildren, all of which have Indian names. Sends them off to the east, that Rashi explains is India, with gifts that Rashi suggests might be Kabbalah. And they set up Hinduism and Buddhism, Eastern religions. And by the way, the main god of Hinduism till today is called Brahman, Abraham Brahman. And a number of the words in Hinduism apparently relate to Jewish sort of ancient biblical words for God and so forth. So basically, Avraham Avinu, when he's in a crisis, he thinks, what did Hashem tell me? And he goes off and he does it. Okay? So that's a lesson for us. When we're in a crisis, we just have to think, what did God tell us? Now, we have one disadvantage and one advantage. We don't have God, generally speaking to us, telling us what to do, but we have a book with Ratzon Hashem, right, with the will of Hashem, which is the Torah. We have the Torah. So all the Torah that we have learned until the point at which we have a crisis is what will help us through that crisis. Okay? The Torah that you've learned up until the point at which you have a crisis is what will help you. And it's obvious because the Torah is what guides us, tells us who we have to be and what we have to do. So when our crisis struck, I felt that I was in a dark room and I was grabbing onto whatever was closest to me. And Baruch Hashem, I had a little bit of emunah, a bit of Torah, a bit of mitzvot, whatever, and that helped me through Had I not had that, maybe I would have grabbed on to depression or to drugs or something else, whatever, chas v'chalila, and that would have been what would have been available. So whatever we educate ourselves with at the point at which we have a crisis, that's what's available to us at that point. So Torah will help us. Tefillah. Why do the rabbis tell us we have to come and say lots of psalms during tefillah, and pray 3 times a day? Why is that going to help the situation? Okay, it's a big question. Why, why should I come and pray for the soldiers to be safe and for the hostages to come home? Hashem's made up his mind, right? It's fair to say that Hashem knows everything, and he's made up his mind. So, what benefit does it make for me to tell Hashem what he should do, right? Interesting question. I thought it was an interesting question. The best answer I heard was from Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg about 3-4 years ago. And somebody just won the lottery in Florida near his shul, and they had the front page of all the newspapers, the ticket number, the shop where it was bought, the time, the day, everything. $150 million prize. One problem, after 6 weeks of advertising it, not one person came and claimed the money. So Rabbi Ephraim said, this is a beautiful mashal for tefillah. He says, Hashem has got $150 million waiting for every single one of us, and all we have to do is bring the ticket. So all we have to do is bring the ticket. In other words, Hashem wants to free the hostages, Hashem wants to bring our soldiers home. He just wants us to come and to pray for it first. So that's the requirement, and every Jew, that's a couple of hours a day, whatever, so we need to daven. That's Torah and that's prayer. But I think the main thing that we can do in a crisis is act, right? Is action, okay? Anyone here feel that there's more they could be doing in terms of current conflict? They feel after what happened they could do a bit more. I feel. So, okay, so sometimes you have that feeling that you could be doing more. If you have that feeling you could be doing more, it's because Hashem is saying to you, you need to be doing a bit more. So what can we do? Okay, number one, I think Rabbi Roberts just came back from a mission. I would highly recommend everybody to come on a mission, whatever age. Take a week of school, take a week of university, take a week of work, take a week, whatever it is. Come on a mission because Israel needs you. Okay, and I've people say, they don't need me. I think Rabbi Roberts will tell you that the amount of appreciation that you get when people see you, the hostage families, or whether it was the soldiers when they went to the Shiva visits, or just helping the agriculture, which is something which is a complete requirement at the moment. They've got the crop. This year's crop is in a complete disaster because there's no Arab workers, there's no Thai workers because they've all gone back home, and most of the farmers are on the battlefield. So the crops are being challenged at the moment. So they need anyone they can hands on deck. I'm sure there are many other things they need as well. Come to Israel, also to do with to help the economy. If you're planning a Christmas holiday or a Easter holiday or a Hanukkah holiday, whatever it is, please think about Israel. It's lovely. Flights, there are flights. It's perfect. Sorry? It's sunny and it's perfectly safe. Probably safer than Europe at the moment. So please consider coming and visiting your family and your friends as well in Israel, who I'm sure would appreciate seeing you too. That's number one. Number two, social media. Okay, imagine that anyone here spend too much time on Telegram and TikTok and Instagram and whatever, and watching TV and newspapers and speaking to friends and arguing about what's going on and philosophizing about why it's going on. And we're all doing too much of that, right? Israel needs you. Okay, your English is better than 99% of Israelis. Okay, what's more is that the biggest problem is that 99% of Israelis think their English is better than yours, and so they're making lots of posts which are very bad. But actually, what they really need is people to make intelligent posts and to explain the situation. I tell you what's going on. As I see it, we Jewish people educate our kids in morality from a very early age. Okay, we may not think about it in those terms, right? We wash your hands, you say the bracha on the bread and on your food, but everything we do is basically teaching morality, right? In a different sort of guise, right? So we're very well tuned in to moral ideas. Okay, I've got a secret for you. For the majority of people out there who don't study this type of thing, don't do these type of things, they don't have such a good grip on morality. So the students in Harvard University, most of them have a less refined understanding of morality than our 5-year-olds. Okay, I mean, we see that. We see that from what's happening on campus, and there's no reason why they should, because they never studied it. Right? It was never given to them. Right? If they're not religious, there's no reason why they should have had any access to it. Which means that you get these strange conversations I've heard on radio phone-ins in London, where a Jewish guy calls in and says, that they murdered 1,400 of our people on October the 7th. He says, yes, but now you're killing all their children in Gaza. He said, yeah, but we're not intending to do it. He said, well, you're dropping bombs on their houses, so that's intention. And you have these strange conversations which are going around, and people accusing us of genocide and basically, people don't understand. Either they don't understand, they don't really want to understand, because they actually, it's a Jew-hating festival. But if you give them kaf zechut, right, there's no reason why they should understand morality, because they haven't actually studied it. And therefore, the Jewish people, it's our duty to try and explain some of these issues. Okay, and we are more qualified than others to do that. Okay, particularly if you have a level of Jewish learning, this is what it's for. This is a moment you're being called to action. Explain to people what's going on. There's something which I coined a word for, which I call an anti-truth. I noticed that our enemies have been using this. It happened to me. That's why I thought about it. CNN, very soon after the tragedy, accused my wife and daughters of being in a shootout with the terrorists on their program, and eventually retracted it. But this was not coincidental, that they were trying to pretend somehow that this was not just a violent terrorist attack. It was actually some sort of just moral equivalent attack between equal parties. The BBC 2 weeks ago were reporting on an Israeli press release to Reuters, where they said that they were going into the Shifa hospital accompanied by Arab speakers and doctors. The BBC chose to report it by saying the IDF is going into the Shifa hospital to target Arab speakers and doctors, which has a slightly different connotation in English. And it took them 10 hours to retract it, okay? Which a media expert, a friend of mine who writes for the Times newspaper, said is impossible. It cannot take 10 hours. Said, first of all, it should never have been reported. It should have been cancelled on live TV, in the process that there are people to cancel these type of things before it actually goes live. And if it did come out, it should have been spotted by any group of experts who were tracking, whose job it is to track it, and they could have cancelled it within 5 minutes or within a minute. So these things are not happening randomly. And they're also only happening against Israel. There are other anti-truths that we're all aware of, right? Israel is accused of being apartheid, okay, and of committing genocide, okay? But if you think about the apartheid, how many synagogues are there in Gaza City or in Ramallah, right? Not very many. How many mosques are there in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, right? Quite a few. So who is apartheid? Us or them? Genocide, right? Can you think of any genocide that Israel perpetrated against the Palestinians in the last 75 years? Well, I can tell you the one genocide that did take place was on October the 7th, where 20% of Kibbutz Be'eri and Kfar Aza and Re'im were wiped out. Just pure civilians, for one reason, because they're Jewish. In fact, I'll tell you, I was asked by a couple to come and speak, by a husband, to speak to his wife from Kfar Aza. They were in a hotel in Bereshit, and he said, will you please come and speak to my wife? So I said, okay, so we arranged a time. I thought maybe she wanted me to talk about bereavement or something, or whatever, that's what I assumed. I turned up, she said to me, in Hebrew, she said, I don't light fire on Shabbat. So I said, Shomer Shabbat, you keep Shabbat. She said, no, you don't understand. She said, I don't light fire on Shabbat. That's all I do. I said, not just on Shabbat, that's my whole Judaism. I just don't light fire on Shabbat. I just don't do a barbecue on Shabbat. Everything else I do. I do whatever I want. So okay. So she said, my daughter, her daughter was 23, was killed in Kfar Aza. She said, my daughter was killed for one reason, and one reason only, because she was Jewish. I don't know what it means to be Jewish. Please tell me. That was completely unprepared, but this is the sort of thing that's happening in Israel at the moment. I mean, as well as many of the other things that you're hearing about. So they have these anti-truths, right? They take the evil that they do to us, and they project it on us and claim that we do it to them. Okay, now another example of this, which I've picked up this week. The West continues to fund the Palestinians, right? And the question is why? They fund the Palestinians because they fear that if they don't fund the Palestinians, they've been told they will become radicalized. If they're poor and they're hungry, whatever, they'll all become radicalized, become terrorists. If you think about it, where is the money that they're putting in going to? It's going to training the children to become terrorists. So the reality is that the more money they give, the more terrorists are being trained. If they stop putting the money in, there would be no training, there'd be no radicalization. And if you think about poor people, I happened to travel extensively in India, and I met the poorest people in the world. This was about 30 years ago. They literally probably had not a penny to their name. They were the most beautiful, peaceful, lovely people I've ever met, right? Not radical in any way whatsoever. There's no correlation between being poor and being radical, right? But there is a huge correlation between people pouring lots of money into pay for slay and training terrorists and being radicalized. So these anti-truths, which people have begun to accept as fact, right? So I'm thinking to myself, why do they do it to us? In other words, it's a very odd thing. I don't think that in any other parts of our lives we ever come across an anti-truth, right? In fact, there's no word in English, that's why I made up the word anti-truth. But there is a word in Hebrew, I think, for an anti-truth. Anyone know what the word is? I only thought about this recently. I think the word is Hamas. The word Hamas, funnily enough, the word Hamas, probably Parshat Noach, every rabbi gave the same drosha. But the world was full of Hamas, right? And Onkelos translated as Chatufim, right? As kidnapping, right? So Hamas means kidnapping. And then it's later translated as violence, right? And in Parshat Mishpatim, we come across an unusual thing called an Eid Hamas, right? A Hamas witness. Now, a Hamas witness is not an Eid Sheker. An Eid Sheker would be a lying witness. That would be someone who'd seen what had happened, but didn't tell the truth. Eid Hamas, says Rashi, is someone who didn't even see it. So what they're saying is so completely random and opposite. It has no bearing on the truth whatsoever. So actually the word Hamas is probably the closest word for anti-truth that exists in the Hebrew language. And the question is, why do they do this? And the only explanation I come up with is as follows. Okay, this is my current assumption. If you have an inexperienced parent, right, and you've got two kids, and the chocolate bar is missing from the fridge, right? So you say, Sally, did you eat it? No, Fred ate it. Fred, did you eat it? No, Sally ate it. So what do? You send the two kids to bed without dinner, right? So what happens is that one of them did very well out of this, and one of them did very badly, right? And the one who did very well learns that actually the best strategy is to accuse the other one first, and they'll always get away with it, right? So what's happened is the world has learned this, that, or the Arabs have learned this, that actually the world is like this sort of inexperienced parent, right? If they can accuse us of stealing the chocolate bar first, then we accuse them, and then basically the best that we can ever get to is zilch, right? The best we can ever get to in terms of PR is nothing, right? If we're lucky, after 10 hours, we can have it removed. That's all we can do. And they were so successful that for 75 years, the department in the Israeli government that was responsible for communications was called Misrad Hasbara. Now, Hasbara is an awful word for a communications department, because Hasbara means explanation, right? In other words, they did such a good job of accusing us of things that we didn't do. We employed a whole group of people in the government to explain that we hadn't done it, right? Which, if we were lucky, would get us to the point of zilch, right? And that was our positive PR, was just eliminating their negative accusation. So that's fortunately the department was closed 2 weeks into the war, because they saw it was actually counterproductive. Because the moment that you actually start explaining, you've actually admitted liability effectively. So now most of the good PR is being done by people like yourself. Actually, the best PR for Israel at the moment, and I'm sure you're seeing it, is done by people who've just taken upon themselves to think of arguments and to explain why we are good and why they are evil. That is the message, by the way, good versus evil. Okay, the message in the past for every other war in Israel's history was, we are the victim and they are the aggressor. Okay? And it was a complete disaster. Why was it a disaster? Because the moment that we retaliated and their number of casualties was higher than our number of casualties, right, then the world said, okay, you've got to stop, because now you're the aggressor and they're the victim, and we scored an own goal. And in fact, that almost happened this time, as you noticed, right? Because we started off talking about, it was 600 casualties, 800, 1,000, 1,200, up to 1,400 casualties, and then the world started counting their casualties, and the moment that they started getting too high, the people, they started saying, but fortunately at this point, Bibi already and the rest of the Israelis had worked out that the message was not number of casualties, that this is actually Hamas equals ISIS, and that we have every right and every responsibility to destroy them completely, but that needs your help in order to keep that message, keep that message going. So that is really my request to you. Please think about how you can contribute, whether it's a mission, whether it's contributing to this worldwide discussion which is going on social media, and getting your views out there, because Israel needs your voice. Okay, there's like a global brainstorming session where Jews are feeding off each other, and actually some non-Jews as well who have been extremely helpful. But we all need to hear each other's voices, because there are a very small number of us who can actually speak English and actually understand what's going on and are following all this. And if any one of you could have an idea which could really spark somebody else, and it could be Bibi's message next week, which could enable us to prolong this war for another week or two. So that is the request. I want to say that from my experience of dealing with tragedy, I went to a psychologist for a number of weeks after the Shiva, and one of the insights that I heard, which was very helpful, was one particular psychologist said to me, he said, you're feeling two separate challenges in your life. He said, number one, he said, when you come home at night and your wife Lucy is not there, that time that you would have spent with her is time which is like sort of a raw wound, which reminds you of what happened. And when you're on Shabbat, when the kids are not there, and when you pick up the telephone to them, and all the time that you would have spent with them is a constant reminder of what you don't have. He said the other thing is when you just think about them. When you think about them, that's also going to bring back a lot of feelings of pain and of sadness. And at this point, I'd already started a number of projects that people had asked me to get involved in. And so I was quite busy. And I said to him, I tell you what, I said, I think these projects are helping me. Because number one, I don't have any spare time. So I don't have that feeling because I don't come across some spare time. I said, number two, everything I'm doing is dedicated to the memory of Lucy, Maya, or Rena, and connects somehow to one of their attributes. And I said, well, so that means that when I think about them, I don't always cry, but sometimes I actually feel happy that something I'm doing now has been inspired by their memory. So I think that if we're feeling any pain from what happened on October the 7th, or we're feeling pain about what's happening on the streets of Berlin and people marching and against us or whatever, then if we take upon ourselves something, a project, right, something that we can do about it, like Rabbi Kiva, something active that we can make a difference, it will help us in two ways. Number one, we won't have so much time to sit on our phones and speak to our friends about how terrible things are. And number two, when we look back, maybe in a year's time or 10 years' time, or when we speak to our grandchildren in the future, we'll be able to say what we were inspired to do by that terrible thing that happened on October the 7th, but how we managed to do something that was really meaningful, that really led to the next stage of Geula, and we were inspired by the terrible atrocities of October the 7th. So I think those are the reasons that we need to become active now and think about what we can do. Pick up the pieces and say, how can we stand up and fight this and take it as a message from Kadosh Baruch Hu to change our daily routines in order to dedicate a little bit more to Am Yisrael, maybe to Medinat Yisrael at this point. Any questions? I don't want to keep it too long, but any thoughts about what's going on? Tell me a bit about what's going on in Berlin.
Do you feel that it's worth saying something? Do you think there are people who are really interested?
So I tell you, it's a good question. So I think people ask this question. In England, I don't know what the statistics are here, but I know in England a couple of weeks ago they had a march of 300,000 people for Palestine. And people asked me, students asked me, should we talk to our friends on campus who are marching with the things, and how do we argue with them and they're not listening to us? I said, let me tell you something. 300,000 people are marching for the Palestinians. 60 million people are not. Okay? Speak to the 60 million people first. Once you speak to the 60 million, you can get onto the 300,000. So I think that it's true here in Germany as well. The vast majority of people are not marching. Those are the people who really, either they don't care, or they don't know, or they're not sure, or they probably support us but don't want to say it. The more that we can give them chizuk, the more that we can educate them, those are the people who can have a big impact on. And there's 60 million of them here, probably as there's 60 million of them in England. So I think, but it's maybe a bit more effort trying to reach them. But maybe speaking, go to a local church and talk about this or something. Talk about Israel, or get those interfaith groups. Actually, this is the time when that actually is not just It's actually one could do something meaningful by meeting with these groups and talking about Israel and having a support Israel discussion or whatever it would be. Maybe even, I have to say to the students, finding a slogan that we could march down the street with our non-Jewish friends, and they could also stand behind it, right? Because I think a lot of what's happening is they've got a slogan which people are marching with. We actually don't have a slogan that they could march with, generally. And if we did, what would it be? I think that's it says a lot. No, it's great. I think it's great for us, but I don't think your average Christian German's going to really care about. No, so I don't know what it could be. So it could be somebody said the West is next, or it could be free Palestinians from Hamas, or it could, I don't know. What is that message that will bring the masses behind us? Because if we don't have it, we can't expect them to march with us. No, maybe I'm Mr. Chaim. Maybe you got to. Maybe there are lots of Israel lovers. That's great. Yeah. When did you had a march?
My husband told me he had a talk with someone.
Yeah.
It was somewhere in British.
He does interfaith work. So her husband does interfaith work here.
Okay. Very good. Okay. So any other questions or? Okay. So thank you for joining and.